All right. Afternoon, everyone. All right, for anyone who is not familiar with me, I'm Bryson Tyrrell. I'm a systems development engineer on the Jamf Cloud engineering team. This year for Penn State, I have another session that's on Friday that I was accepted for. Our marketing team offered for me to take the sponsored slot this year, and I figured, why not? They even allowed me to pick the topic that I wanted to talk about. Very gracious of them. So I decided to take this opportunity to do something that's not technical. If you came for a technical session because my name was on it, you might be a little disappointed. Come back Friday. We'll cover something a lot more technical. But this topic is actually something that's pretty near and dear to me because it's something that I actually talk about a lot. This is really going to be about the marketplace and the new home for integrations that we're listing for customers to go browse and use with Jamf Pro in their environments. The illustrious Charles Edge, for those who don't know him, he's the guy who uses an O'Reilly dog as his avatar. He's the director of the marketplace, and he announced it on the main stage at JNUC, this past JNUC in 2017. Was anybody here for JNUC? It's not so bad. So the marketplace is actually a step forward in this mission that we have that's kind of referred to as Jamf and, where it's the Jamf ecosystem and other services that work together in order to make it a much better experience for our admins and end users. So the marketplace actually serves a really key role in this vision because it's a centralized location for all of our customers to be able to go and find consultants, managed service providers, and integrations. The marketplace is not going to become like the de facto source of truth for this, however. We're not going to get into a situation where the marketplace is the only place you go for things like this, but it serves as a very convenient channel for people to go to in order to find solutions to problems that they're facing and know that they will work with Jamf Pro. Most of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to be focusing on integrations, but I did want to take a moment to highlight those consultants and managed service providers that we do list. So we do have a global network of 60 plus Jamf certified individuals and organizations that are out on the marketplace. So Jamf has a really great pro services team, but that team isn't always able to fulfill the needs of the customer. There are some services that we don't provide. They're also pretty booked, so sometimes we aren't available in the time frame that you need. So when that situation arises, you can come to the marketplace and browse the consultant network to find individuals or organizations who are close to you who will be able to fill that need. I'm really missing my clicker right now. All right. So as of today, we actually have 5 certified MSPs listed who provide management services using Jamf Pro. That's DataJar, IBM, TransCloud Manage Plus, YPro, and Stratix. This list is continuing to grow. This slide's actually been updated twice in the past week or two because every time I went back to this page, we added someone. Just a reminder that Ben does work at DataJar. So now moving on, I want to get into the real meat of the marketplace, which is the integrations. And integrations to Jamf Pro, they come in all sorts of shapes, sizes, different flavors. Internally, we refer to all these things as integrations. They can be scripts, they can be applications, they can be third-party services, they can be open-source projects, just anything that works with Jamf Pro or enhances the ability of a Mac administrator with Jamf Pro to service their clients. We have 80 listings in the marketplace so far, but I've chosen a small sampling of those to just sort of highlight and show sort of the wide array of things that you can find in there. The first tool that stuck out to me, in fact, I saw it being discussed on Slack not too long ago, is Get to JSS. So Get to JSS is it's a script command line utility, and it's allowing admins to bring more source control methods to how they handle scripts in Jamf Pro for like policies. So the idea is you commit all your scripts inside a Git repo, and then as you commit that, you use this tool in order to do an export. You tag it. Your tag would probably be the version that you want to give it, and then it goes into Jamf Pro. The cool thing about this is that when you do this, it will also send a change log and attach it to that note object that you find on all this on scripts in the JSS. So if you go to notes, this utility actually throws the change log and the history in there. It also makes it easy to roll back. So if you're in the event where you pushed out a bad script, because everything's tagged, you can perform the export again, specifying an older tag that you did, and it will then send that script into Jamf Pro. So it's a really cool utility. A little bit of an older one, but this is one that Charles Edge actually did write and threw up at one point. Pre-cache, who uses caching servers in their environment? So the idea with pre-cache, and there was another tool before he wrote this script that did this as well. I don't remember what it was called. I think it was called Cache Warmer. But instead of waiting for Mac clients to make that first request for App Store content, which would then start the caching process, which by that time you actually might have a whole bunch of them doing that in parallel, which means they're all downloading it over the internet instead of from your cache because it hasn't successfully completed once already. Pre-cache will, if you set it up, periodically go out, check a bunch of models that you've defined, and then load all those packages from the App Store. So that way, when those clients do make that first connection, the caching server will report, hey, I already have it, and then it won't download over the internet. It also has a nice feature where you can actually throw it at Jamf Pro, point it at Jamf Pro, I'm sorry, in order to aggregate a list of all the models that you currently have in your environment, and it'll pass those instead of you defining them. We also have Nomad in the marketplace. Who here uses Nomad? So Nomad is a really, really great app. If you have Active Directory, in your environment and you haven't looked at Nomad yet, do so. It's actually installed on my Mac right now. It allows users to manage their AD passwords without being bound to the Active Directory domain, and it also allows you to have them sync their local password with AD. It simplifies things a lot. I found it really helpful for myself. I could talk a lot about Nomad, I really could, but I don't really have to. If you just go find this man right here, Joel Rennick, he's here at the conference, hunt him down, corner him, do whatever you want. You can ask him all about Nomad. And while you're at it, also throw in a question or two about Point Break. I hear he really likes that. All right, Splash Buddy. Who here has used or heard of Splash Buddy? So Splash Buddy is an open source GUI app that is meant to be integrated into like a DEP workflow. It came out, let's see, when did he start working on it? He started working on it after the IBM presentation at JNUC 2 years ago, when IBM showed off their fancy enrollment process. Everybody wanted it, but it wasn't open source, so Splash Buddy came about. And it provides a really nice user experience, because after the DEP enrollment step has taken place, Splash Buddy comes down, and then it starts showing feedback in different screens to the end user about what actions are taking place in the background as enrollment steps finish up. Another thing that you're going to find in the marketplace are software development kits, which is a little different from the other ones I talked about. These are modules and libraries for different programming languages to make it so that when you're building your own tools, if you want to take out a lot of the work involved with writing your own wrappers to the API or handling the requests, we have a number of SDKs to actually handle that. Ruby JSS is from our friends over at Pixar. They use this in a lot of their tooling, including D3, which is a package distribution system that they created in-house. That's also listed on the marketplace if you're curious about that at all. Anyone here write in Ruby? Oh. Well, if you're interested in that, Chris Lascelles did a really great presentation back in 2016 about alleviating the apprehension of coding in Ruby. He walks through using this SDK in Ruby code in order to do things with the JSS API. Good session. It's on YouTube. I recommend you go check it out. The other one, which some of you actually might be familiar with, is Python JSS. Has anyone here used this one? Right on. So Python JSS is the Python library that was originally written by Shay Craig. He doesn't actively maintain it anymore, but a bunch of people in the community do. This one provides an easier, more Pythonic way when you're writing Python code of interacting with the API. It also has a number of methods that are more administrative actions for interacting with clients, as well as things like distribution points and managing packages. So it's a pretty popular SDK in the community. Central, I thought I would throw this out there. Central's a third-party open source platform. It's a data aggregator. It allows you to build analytics off of data that you collect from numerous sources. Jamf Pro is one of those supported sources. This consumes webhooks and as well as data over the API. They got a lot of videos out on their YouTube channel. I think they presented once at JNUC about integrating Jamf Pro with Central to get data sets off of. I would recommend you go check those out if you're interested in anything like that. They position themselves on the GitHub page as sort of like that solution leading up to massive scale, where if you're at massive scale, you might be working with something like Splunk, but if you're in that small to medium business range, or you're just not at the point where you need to do massive scale, Central is actually a really good solution. And also, some of our stuff is in the marketplace as well. Some of the Jamf developed and supported solutions, such as the healthcare listener, are out there. Is anyone here in the healthcare industry? Hey. I got one hand raised out of 3 questions. Awesome.
The government institute is healthcare, if that makes sense.
That's close enough. We're going to go with it for the purposes of this. So the healthcare listener is a plugin that we developed that works with Jamf Pro as well as electronic medical record systems. So that way, as events are happening on patient records, if the hospital or healthcare provider is using iPads for in-room experiences, they can trigger events to happen to those iPads based on things like admittance, transfers, and discharges. Common workflow is as soon as the patient is marked for discharge, the iPad becomes automatically wiped, and then it reloads and goes through DEP again and becomes a fresh device for the next patient. So Marketplace was just announced at JNUC. It's still very new. It's still very basic too. Right now, it's just listings. It doesn't facilitate things like purchasing any of these products that are for sale. It's a big mix of third-party services and open source projects and other applications. Some are free, some are paid. We don't facilitate anything like buying through the marketplace for the ones that are paid. But we are in the process of iterating on this and making it better and getting it getting it towards a future state of where we want to take the ability for customers to one-click obtain integrations for Jamf Pro. First obvious thing is going to be ratings. There aren't ratings for integrations on there right now. It would be really helpful if you were able to vote 1 through 5 stars, whatever, and be able to attribute to whether or not you have a favorable impression of an integration, or if you had a bad experience with it. Sort of hand in hand with that, there aren't any comments yet. We want to do comments, so that way if you want to leave testimonial on an integration, you can do so, and then that helps the next person who comes along who are evaluating a solution, and they want to know whether or not what kind of experience people have had with it. And then there's this concept of Jamf supported third-party integrations, and the idea, and this is something I talked to Charles a little bit about, he was communicating it to me, is that certain integrations, we'll want to flag them as being supported by Jamf, meaning that if you go to implement it and it's not working for whatever reason, you would have the expectation that you could file a support ticket just like any other Jamf product issue, and then somebody from our team would be able to help you get it into a working state. And then, of course, it's still new. Like I say, there's 80 things in there, but there are 80 types of integrations and third-party services that cover a whole wide range of different kinds of solutions. We are working towards getting more in there, and that's going to be through pursuing partnerships with other organizations, other development shops, as well as making more resources available to individual developers and administrators so that they're able to take advantage of Jamf APIs and then build solutions around them. Which does raise the question, what sorts of resources are we going to be giving those developers and admins? Well, this is where we're going to switch gears, and a little bit of bait and switch. Session title was about the marketplace. Now we're going to talk about the developer portal, though. And the developer portal was actually announced alongside the marketplace by Charles during that same JNUC keynote. And the truth is, they really go tightly hand in hand. The developer portal is going to be the one-stop shop for admins and developers who are working with Jamf API. So if you want to know how to do something, this is where you're going to want to go. So let's do a little tour about what all is out there. So for the longest time, who here is a Jamf customer? I actually wouldn't have been surprised if at least one of you didn't raise your hand. But for the longest time, the community has been saying, can we have an API reference that we don't have to go to our Jamf Pro instance to actually look at? And we did finally deliver that. On the developer portal, you can go browse a complete API reference just like on the Jamf Pro server itself. Now, if this looks kind of familiar, it's because the API reference that's out on the developer portal is built off of an open API doc exactly like the one on the Jamf Pro server is. If you aren't familiar with open API doc, that's just open API is just the new name for Swagger. If you aren't familiar with what Swagger is, don't worry about it. You don't have to care. You have an API reference now, and that's the only thing that's actually important. Now, even though they looked really similar, there are some notable differences which make the new API reference that's publicly available really powerful. So the version on the developer portal, it's going to contain a little bit more context around all these different endpoints that you have available. Not only will you have a full example, like in posts and puts, on the Jamf Pro servers API reference, you're not going to get examples of what to send. On this reference, it will contain examples of the XML that you would send to it. But in addition to having that, there's also this small little link right next to it that says model. So if you switch from the example to the model, what it's going to actually show you is the schema for that. And the schema is going to tell you things like, it's going to break down all the different elements that are inside that XML document. It's going to give you the types, so strings, booleans, integers. It's going to tell you what types they are. It's going to give some per field descriptions. It's going to give examples for each key. So when you had the example, the full example that was showing the actual XML document, that's all broken down per field in the schema. Also, there's going to be cases where in some of the XML that you would send to Jamf Pro, where there's only a certain set of allowed values that you're submitting. They're referred to as enums. If you go into the schema for the example, it will actually show you what all the accepted values are. So using the API reference on the new developer portal is actually going to take out some of the guesswork when it comes to crafting these payloads when you're writing your own API integrations. So alongside the reference, there is some documentation, and they really are sort of two separate things. The reference tells you everything that you have access to. The documentation is going to tell you a little bit about how to use it. So, for example, like a lot of times there's always questions about if you're building an integration, you're going to want to have a service account in order to load into it to be able to access the API. There's a section here that covers creating service accounts with specific permissions for API usage. Scroll down a little bit more. It covers all the various HTTP methods that are actually used by the API, provides some context around them. For example, for post requests only accept XML, same for put requests. But also for the post, it calls out that when you're using a post to create a new resource, you always use ID 0. Because you post ID 0, it allows Jamf Pro to automatically assign the ID number that's next available for that specific resource. I can't stress enough, never try to actually post to a specific ID number. That's a common gotcha for, oh, hi, Tim. So anyway, some of the common gotchas when getting started with the API, they're actually detailed here, so it's a good thing to go read through. Especially when you're playing around with the API, experimenting with things, and you encounter error codes. This section right here will actually give you the common explanations as to why you're going to encounter those error codes when you're interacting with the API. And then also, as things continue to iterate, the documentation will include useful information about other types of behaviors when it comes to the API. And this is a relatively new section. Just recently, we made it so that a number of resources in the API would now accept a password in the payload. So that way, when you were creating or updating those resources, you were able to set or change a password. Before this, there were actually a number of objects where when you performed a get operation, you could see that there was a hashed password field in there. But it wasn't clear about whether or not you could send a value back to change that password. It wasn't clear what the name of that key is supposed to be when you were providing that password. Some worked, some didn't. That all got cleared up, and we did document it. So if you're thinking about any sort of automation or workflows or integrations that involve creating access accounts for people to be able to log into a Jamf Pro server, or rotating passwords for things like distribution points, LDAP servers, anything along those lines, information about how to actually send those values to the server are done here. And just to clarify, when you send them up, you're sending them plain text, and then when Jamf Pro goes to record them, it's going to hash them. When you're reading them back out from Jamf Pro, that's a salted hash that's not actually reversible. So there's no way to decrypt passwords that you get back in payloads. You're given a salted hash that's actually not really usable unless you have the salt from the database. All right. Now, perhaps one of the most valuable pages that you're going to find out here, if you're just getting started with the API, are the samples, all the example code that we put out there. These are short snippets of either a shell command using curl or some Python that show you how to actually perform basic interactions with the API. As you're getting a little bit more advanced and you don't want to do a lot of the legwork, you might go back to the marketplace and check out some of those SDKs. I mentioned the Ruby one, I mentioned the Python one. There's actually a Swift one on there also for those of you who are jumping on Joel's bandwagon. But if you don't hate yourself, you can just use Python. So there are two examples actually out here that I want to call out to you, because if you're trying to think about ways of building automation in Jamf Pro, two of these examples might actually start giving you some ideas. So the first one is actually going to detail issuing remote commands. So there are endpoints for mobile devices and computers to be able to send an MDM command to that device. This right here is a minimal example of how to do that. So you can take this will work, and then you can build on top of this if you want to do additional MDM commands or send it to more than one device. This one is just an example for sending one device, but it's in the XML there, it's actually an array, so you can pass it to numerous devices in one go. If you want to know all of the MDM commands that are actually supported for sending through the API, you would jump back to the API reference and go to that endpoint, post mobile device commands, I believe it is, /command. And then it'll actually, in detail, show you all the different MDM commands you're able to send this way. The other, which this is actually one that comes up most frequently, I think, on Jamf Nation when people are talking about the API, and that's updating extension attributes. So if you have a device and you want to flip an extension attribute on it to a new value, this, again, is another minimal example of how to do that. And extension attributes are the real secret sauce behind building really powerful automations in Jamf Pro, because you can use them for scoping. And if you use them for scoping, that means you can dynamically move things in and out of smart groups just by changing values. And you can do that programmatically through the API. And this example right here and the one before about mobile device commands, they actually are pretty interchangeable between the two types of devices. Computers and mobile devices, they have different endpoints, but they operate pretty much the same way. So then that comes to the last section in the developer portal, and that's going to be webhooks. And webhooks are actually something I've talked about a lot. I've been roped into talking about them again at JNUC this year, so instead of rehashing stuff I've done in the past, expect me to talk about a whole bunch of crazy stuff that I've been doing if you come to JNUC. But webhooks are all about event-driven integrations. Who here has actually heard about event-driven architectures, event-driven applications? I know you have. I know, I did ask. But the idea here is that let's walk through an example. If you're just using the API, if you're just using the Jamf API, and you want to actually perform some automation on computers or mobile devices, and you want to have that kept current, say you are keeping information about devices in sync between two different systems. So in order to be current on that and not be lagging behind, you're going to need to, if this is purely just the API, you're going to need to set up some sort of recurring task that's going to go out and pull in data from the API and then figure out what's new and then start processing those records. You can solve this partially by, say, using a smart group that looks for devices that have reported inventory for the last 15 minutes. And then your recurring task could be set for to run every 15 minutes. So that way you're keeping somewhat in line with what the standard check-in period for computers are. So you're now having scripting running every 15 minutes, pulling from this group, and then going through all the computers it gets back, or mobile devices, and then grabbing their data from the API, and then performing your business logic on that, and then working with the other system. This is all happening every 15 minutes, and it's actually really wasteful processing. It's really inefficient because if you all of a sudden get a flood of computers in, that's going to bog things down a whole lot if you aren't scaled out for it. Instead, you can imagine what if you took your integration and you designed it so that it worked with Computer Inventory Complete and Mobile Device Check-in webhooks. Now, those are two of the available webhooks that we have in Jamf Pro currently. You can get rid of a lot of the processing that we just described if you're designing it to be event-driven instead. Computer Inventory Complete only fires whenever inventory submission happens. Mobile Device Check-in happens every time the device checks in back home because it's doing an inventory submission, and generally those only happen once a day anyway. And same thing for computers. Computers will check in every 15 minutes. They will only submit inventory, unless you've changed it, usually once a day. So when that event fires, your integration receives it. It knows that a device record has actually been updated, which means if inside that event payload you don't have all the information that you require, you can immediately have the integration do a return API call, get the full record, and then perform the processing with the second service, and then be done. It's a lot more efficient. It's also going to be a lot faster, and it's going to be a lot more scalable because you're responding to events as they happen instead of doing these really long continuous polling processes. Now, if you intend to build an integration that's going to operate in real time, that means you are probably going to be designing towards using webhooks. These are JSON or XML payloads that Jamf Pro is going to be sending out as post requests, which means your integration is going to be web-based. Web-based doesn't mean public. It just means that your Jamf Pro server has to be able to reach it over HTTPS. That's about it. So it needs to be able to accept and process those events. But there's a lot of flexibility here because there are, in fact, 18 different types of webhook events that you can build automation around if you're going down this path. Many of these events actually share the same type of payload, like with the computer events here. Computer add, computer check-in, computer inventory complete, computer policy complete, and computer patch or computer push capability change. All these events actually share the exact same type of payload, which, here, let me go back one slide here. They share this exact same payload. The only thing that's going to be different is where at the bottom it says webhook. That will define what type of event is being sent. So you can have something that actually receives all sorts of different kinds of events, and it just filters them out based upon that type, and then it can perform different kinds of processing. So here's an idea for you if you're planning to do anything around compliance. There is a smart group webhook. So smart group webhooks for computers and mobile devices, when they fire off their events, they're going to include two arrays, devices added and devices removed. So if you're thinking about ideas for how to build automation, consider the kinds of powerful things you might be able to do with an integration that's listening for smart group changes, and then it's taking actions either by MDM command or by updating extension attributes for those devices if they're added or removed. Because if you're operating in response to that, then that means you can, based upon whatever the circumstance was or which group a device was added to or removed from, you can flip extension attributes to move them into different groups, or you can issue immediate MDM commands. The thing that I mentioned before about flipping extension attributes means you can drop them into other smart groups, which can automatically trigger policies the next time they check in. You can also do things like add them to static groups if you don't want to do smart group, if you don't want to leverage smart groups for that, say like quarantine groups and things like that. There's a lot of powerful things that you can do building around event-driven architectures because you're going to know exactly what happened, what it happened to, and why it happened. So I think we've established that everybody here is a Jamf customer, but in the event that there is anyone who is not a Jamf customer and they want to take advantage of some of this because they have an idea, they want to build an integration with the product, there is a developer program that they can go out and join. Developer program is going to give them access to an instance of Jamf Pro that's hosted in Jamf Cloud. It will enable them to be able to open up support tickets for issues they run into with the APIs. And depending upon what they're building, there's always the opportunity that they can engage with our marketing team for promoting it. I'm going to stress, though, for everybody here in the crowd, since you've raised your hands and said you were Jamf customers, you don't have to do this. If you're running your own JSS, you are actually encouraged to go ahead and fire one up on the side just to use for testing and development purposes. You don't need to get special permission from us to do that. So then, at the end of this journey, when you finally, wasted all your time going through the API reference and reading our dull documentation and tinkering around with webhooks and, building something that actually does something with Jamf Pro, then it's time to probably talk about submitting it to the marketplace. Like I said, both of these things go hand in hand. The developer portal and developer program is meant to facilitate you in building integrations and then bringing them to the marketplace so that way people have an easy time finding them and putting them to use. Now, the bar for putting your work on the marketplace is really not that high, but we do have some requirements if you want to have it out there. The first one, which everybody's favorite topic, is that you should have it documented. And, the level of documentation is not something that we really have a litmus test for, but, someone who's using your integration, if it's on the marketplace, should be able to read it, understand it, and know how to use it. It also has to be testable. When you submit to the marketplace, it doesn't go on there immediately. Someone from Jamf is going to review your submission, and they're going to try it out to make sure that it works as advertised. So make sure that whatever you put out there is testable. Now, this one trips up people sometimes because, yes, there needs to be some sort of channel for people. If it's on the marketplace, we want there to be a channel for people who are using it to be able to get some help. That doesn't mean that we're talking about somebody answering emails or answering a phone, though, and I'll get into some examples of this in just a minute. And then this seems like a gimme or kind of obvious, but yeah, it should work, and it should continue to work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that too after we get past my support examples. So, going back to the marketplace, if you sign up for an account, you will then get this option for My Apps at the top. That takes you to a page that shows you everything that you have submitted to the marketplace. And then it will also give you this Add App option right there front and center. You click that, and it's going to take you to a form for you to fill out to provide all the details about the integration that you want to post. So some of the things that are on here, the summary, that's going to be the short description that you see on the main listing page. Make it too long, it'll get cut off. So it's your chance to throw a couple of sentences on there, to be sort of like the hook. The description is going to be where you do a lot more detail because that's going to be what's shown on the integration page itself. If you're doing an open source project or a utility or something that is out on GitHub or GitLab and you have a README file, the contents of your README file are actually a really good thing to throw into the full description. And you'll find that a lot of listings on there that are GitHub postings do that. Same thing can be said for the website URL that you see at the bottom and a lot of the other URLs that you see on here. You can actually just link back to the project's home in order to fulfill those requirements. Also, take the opportunity to throw screenshots on there, even if it is something simple like a command line utility or a script. Screenshots can provide, even for those things, screenshots can provide a lot of context about how it's being used that just snippets in your README don't always provide. And then if your integration is only going to work with certain versions of Apple devices or certain versions of Jamf Pro, be sure to note them on those appropriate fields. And then after that's all done, somebody at Jamf has reviewed it, has tested it, has vetted it. It gets approved. It's now listed on the marketplace, and you can go to it, and it has its own page that looks a lot like this. Now, I have a few of my own projects that are listed on the marketplace. I just want to note that these are not official Jamf products. These are projects that I maintain for the community. The one I'd like to use as an example to go through some of the things I just talked about is Patch Server. And out of curiosity, does anybody in here use Patch Server? Okay. My feelings aren't hurt. All right. But back in 10.2, we introduced the ability to have your own patch feed that Jamf Pro could read from. There's the official patch feed, which has been in there since, was it 10? 10? I think it was 10. Yeah, he's nodding. It was 10. I work for Jamf, and I think it was in 10. So we had our own official feed. A couple of versions later, complying with the community's demand for it, we opened that up so that way the same framework that we use for reading in the official Jamf patch feed can be applied for your own personal patch feed. So that way, there's a KB out on Jamf Nation that actually documents how to set up a server to provide those feeds so that Jamf Pro can consume them. Patch Server is an implementation of that. And just like anybody else's integration, I had to meet those requirements in order for this to be listed there. Chief being that it had to be documented. So Patch Server has a whole lot of features in it. It's because it's an application. A README on the GitHub page wouldn't really do it because there's a few things in there. The documentation for my project actually lives out on a service called readthedocs.org. It's actually something I spoke about during MacAdmins earlier this year. I presented on doing self-documenting code. Readthedocs.org was a part of that presentation. This is a free service for open source projects that will automatically build new documentation every time you commit to the branch on your repository. And the docs for Patch Server are pretty comprehensive. The main page contains things about using the UI for the server itself. But there are two separate APIs that this application provides. So I have one page dedicated towards the patch API itself, because in addition to using the UI to manage your definitions, the UI actually uses an API. And the API is there so that you can plug in things to automate the management of your patch definitions. There's actually a bunch of people who have built workflows around auto package processors running and then updating their patch feeds with what those new versions are, and then they're available in Jamf Pro. So end-to-end integrations using a few different pieces. The other part is actually the endpoints that Jamf Pro itself consumes. So much like the KB article on Jamf Nation, I have a section in the documentation that actually details how those endpoints work. And then, of course, there's also the piece where people need to know how to be able to set this thing up. So I have documentation and installation instructions for different platforms. The one at the very top is all about how to set it up for testing. If you just want to try it out and experiment with it, there's one page that shows you how to do it in a very minimal fashion that's not production worthy at all. But when somebody at Jamf had to go through and evaluate this to make sure that it worked as advertised, they just followed this page's instructions right there, and they were able to say, yes, this actually does perform what it says it does. Now, back to that red herring about you need to have support. Support means that there is somewhere that someone who uses your integration can go in order to report a problem and get back an answer. But it doesn't mean a call center, and it doesn't mean having a ticket queue system. For all of my projects, I encourage people to actually open up issues on the GitHub page in order to get back to me whether they found a bug or if they have a feature request. That's my preferred avenue. This is the link that I provide on the integration page for Patch Server. It's actually going to the GitHub issues. The other avenue that is available is actually in the MacAdmins Slack. So in here, I actually have Slack channels for the different projects that I'm maintaining and supporting. And in Patch Server, there's actually 100 people in that channel now. A lot of them are using this integration in order to do patch feeds. It's gotten to the point where earlier on, I was doing a lot of answers at Q&A and helping people with some issues and responding to them. But now it's gotten to the point where mostly before I even jump in there, people have answered the questions that have already been raised. So this is a community sourced path for providing support for my open source project. So it's not me personally being on the hook for everything. It's now gotten to the point where I can rely on the community to be able to help each other out if they've encountered if they're asking questions about something that's not a problem with the code. And then to take that and circle back to the thing where I mentioned where it needs to work. When you first build something, it's probably going to work just fine. But there are plenty of projects that, for all sorts of reasons, just fall out of maintenance. The people who did work on it have moved on to different roles, and they were originally maintaining those projects as a part of their job. There's nobody else to pick it up. New versions of Jamf Pro or the Apple OSs come out which break compatibility, but there's no one around to actually go back and update those projects anymore. Things fall out of maintenance and fall out of support all the time for all sorts of reasons. If somebody reports that there's something on the marketplace that's listed and it's not working anymore, and we determine that it's not going to be maintained or updated in order to address that, we'll drop it from the listings, because we want to maintain a list of integrations that we know are going to work for our customers. As I mentioned, there's lots of reasons why things can go out of maintenance. If you're logged into the marketplace and you're looking at your listings and you have something on there that I'm not going to be maintaining this anymore, you can actually go in and suspend it yourself. So Casper Chat, I was forced to rename it when I put it up here. Casper Chat was my very first integration, and it was an early one on the marketplace. This was an integration between Jamf Pro with Webhooks and HipChat for doing room notifications on events that were going on inside the server. It was really cool. It worked really well. But then Atlassian decided they were going to deprecate HipChat. They're switching over to Atlassian Stride. I'm not going to actually go through the effort of making the updates necessary to make Casper Chat work with Atlassian Stride, because we actually aren't going to use Atlassian Stride at Jamf going forward. We're moving off HipChat to another platform. So I'm not going to be updating this. I opted to actually take it off the marketplace myself. You hit suspend. It doesn't delete the listing, but it hides it. Now this also doesn't affect anything about the project itself. The code is still out on GitHub and anyone can go get to it. This is just me opting to remove it from the marketplace because I don't want to get questions about why it's not working. So if there are a few things that you can take away from the session, and most of all, what I hope you take away from it is a little bit of excitement maybe for the path that we're starting to go down with the marketplace and the developer portal. We're approaching a much more modern sort of integration ecosystem that you see with lots of other platforms where they have a dedicated marketplace that's tightly integrated into the product. I mean, how many people here use Slack? How many people here love that experience when you want to add an app to Slack? You one-click do it, right? That's if you talk to Charles or myself, that's the future that we want to see Jamf heading to. Marketplace and the developer portal are stepping stones along that path to try and get there. Now, with that, we've reached the end. I am just a lowly developer. Understand that, prefacing. I will attempt to answer any questions that you do have. If it's something I can't answer, just come over, give me your contact information, and I know the people to go pester in order to get the answers. And we have the catch box if anyone does have questions. I'm going to toss it back there.
So maybe this is not an easy question, but let's say I've got a guy that's a little server that's ready to listen for those webhook requests. If it's HTTPS, does that mean that server needs to have the cert on it in order to make that an encrypted connection?
The last time I asked about that, I don't know if Jamf Pro was actually... No, it does do cert verification, and I believe it uses... I don't know which key store it uses, so I'm actually going to take that, Corey Hondel is actually the person I'm going to go pester about this. He's an engineer who helped build webhooks. I will check that. Is it a self-signed certificate?
Yeah, I assume I've got a little server that's ready to listen to that post request. If it's HTTPS, that server.
There actually is something else you could do to cheat that. You can issue a web certificate from Jamf Pro Certificate Authority and give that to your server, and that will be trusted.
Yeah.
So instead of if you're in a situation where you don't have a cert authority of your own to use, but you want to have things that Jamf Pro can connect to, instead of going the self-signed cert route, issue a certificate from Jamf Pro and use that. We actually did that for a bunch of stuff internally at Jamf.
That sounds good.
Got other questions? That was one good one. Can we go for two? Well, hey, this one was a little bit on the shorter side, but I hope you guys got something out of it. Oh, wait.
All right. I have more of a basic question about how the marketplace could be used. When I read into this course, what the description was, I was thinking, how can we make things simpler, whether it's ticket based or systems and things like that? Is the marketplace? What is the main focus? What is the main questions you get asked, and how is it utilized? I guess so. What are the most common things people use the marketplace for?
So currently, the main focus of the marketplace is to actually put out there a large listing of all the open source projects, as well as third-party products and services that do work with Jamf Pro. Like there's some stuff on there for what ticketing system do you use?
ServiceNow.
We actually have a ServiceNow integration.
They won't pay for it. I knew that. Right? That was the one I was thinking of, but
it's marketing's presentation slot, so I got to plug to some things here and there.
I understand. I guess what I'm thinking, there's some lapse in productivity or workflow that I think it can be improved, and that's why I was trying to look at this course to see how I could use some of these workflows to make things easier. I'm trying to think of an example. What's the most common questions you get asked about the marketplace, like other than APIs? Like,
the marketplace is really new, so we don't actually get too many questions about it yet.
Yeah, I had a feeling.
But we have a developer relations team.
Okay.
So if you actually want to articulate the gaps that you're seeing, like I said, we are trying to pursue more integrations with more organizations and other companies in order to bridge those workflow gaps. So if you have a particular use case with a particular provider that you can't find a solution for, I can take that back to them.
What was the one we looked at? I'm going to be real quick, sorry, for someone else's raising their hand. The one we talked about earlier, was it Zentral?
Yeah.
What's a good example of someone using that? Like, I mean, say I have...
Zentral's primary purpose in life is analytics.
Yeah, so pulling in, say I wanted to pull in what Mac users and what printers they're using, other than going to computers, search in JSS, the printers they have, and I want to pull up what's their default. Could something like Zentral help me make that process smoother?
I believe so, because it does allow you to aggregate data from Jamf Pro, especially if you're tagging in webhooks to it. I'd have to go look at that though.
Okay, no big deal.
But I know that people like with Splunk, like I've seen great stuff done with Splunk, because Splunk has all that rich dashboarding built into it and reporting. That's building all that off aggregated data. And there's actually one of the integrations that are listed on the marketplace is from Jamf, but it's considered our Skunkworks team. It's an experimental thing. It's not supported by Jamf. Our research and development team came up with it and put it on there. But it is a processor to load into Splunk to receive webhooks from Jamf Pro.
I mean, obviously I can go into the JSS search and put that line, with Jamf 10 now you can actually see the printers, and it's not in like a syntax. It's if they're IP printers. I was just thinking of a simple way to send an Excel form to my management. These are the printers we're using, so they know without me doing like 3 hours of work. So that's what I was kind of looking at. That was just a small example.
Let's take this offline, because I think there might be stuff that can tie into Zentral to actually build reports off that.
Okay.
Anyone else got anything? Right on. I'm going to give you back 25 minutes to do whatever. Thank you for coming.